Hey guys, tonight we begin with something deceptively sweet and quietly ruthless. The story of how a small troop of girls with a sugar cookie recipe accidentally built one of the most unstoppable little selling machines in American history. That's right, tonight we're talking about the humble Girl Scout cookie, the only product on earth that can convince a grown adult to hand over cash to a child standing outside a supermarket, walk away with a thin cardboard box and then feel genuinely grateful for the experience. It is a business empire disguised as a wholesome afternoon activity, and by the end of tonight you will never look at a sleeve of Thin Mints the same way again. Before we get comfortable, I want to sincerely thank the listener who suggested this one. You have no idea how much I appreciate the topics you send in. This channel genuinely grows because of your ideas, so keep them coming. And if you enjoy what I do here, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually want to. No pressure at all. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is, because it is somehow always the middle of the night somewhere. Oh, and we are now on Spotify as well, so if you would rather drift off with just the audio, the link is in the description. And if you'd like a little more, membership is already available on the channel, which gives you access to 8 hours of ad-free video to drift off to, uninterrupted whenever you like. Now dim the lights, switch on a fan for that soft background hum, get comfortable, and maybe hide the snacks, because this episode may make you hungry. Let us pause for a second and wonder. Have you ever asked yourself how a cookie sold by children became a nearly billion-dollar operation? Why these cookies only appear for a few weeks a year, like a delicious comet? How a 9-year-old somehow out-negotiates you every single February? Why you own a chest freezer that is, at this very moment, secretly storing 4 boxes of Thin Mints for emergencies? Could you have survived selling cookies door to door in an era before doorbells were polite? And would you last one afternoon running a lemonade stand-sized business that now moves 200 million boxes a season? Well, tonight you are about to find out. Congratulations! You've just woken up in Muskogee, Oklahoma, in the winter of 1917, the year a group of teenage girls lit the fuse on an empire and had absolutely no idea they were doing it. Good luck. Before there were cookies, there was Juliette Gordon Lowe, a partly deaf, endlessly stubborn woman from Savannah, Georgia, who founded the Girl Scouts in 1912 with a single phone call and boundless nerve. She told a friend she had something for the girls of Savannah and all of America and all the world, and she meant every word. Juliette was eccentric in the best way, known for standing on her head to show off a new uniform and for pouring most of her own money into the movement. She was not thinking about cookies. She was thinking about giving girls a reason to gather, to camp, to lead, and to believe they could do things the world told them they could not. To understand how radical this was, you have to remember what the world expected of a girl in 1912. The expectation was, roughly, to be quiet, to be decorative, and to marry well. Juliette looked at that expectation and decided it was nonsense. She had lived an unconventional life herself, travelling widely, surviving a difficult marriage, and losing much of her hearing after a grain of good luck rice thrown at her wedding lodged in her ear and an infection did the rest. If that sounds like the origin story of a slightly chaotic superhero, that is because it more or less was. She gathered 18 girls for that first troop and gave them something almost no one else was offering: permission. Permission to hike in the woods, to play basketball behind curtains so passers-by would not be scandalized by the sight of girls moving quickly, to learn first aid, to tie knots, to imagine a life beyond the parlor. She sold her own pearls at one point to keep the organization funded, which is the historical equivalent of putting your startup on a personal credit card and praying. Her personality was, by every account, a lot. She was impulsive, forgetful, and charming to the point of being impossible to say no to, a trait she would unknowingly pass down to roughly a century of small cookie salespeople. She would invite people to dinner and forget she had done so. She would launch grand plans on a whim. But underneath the whirlwind was a genuine, unshakable belief that girls were capable of far more than anyone gave them credit for, and that if you handed them real responsibility, they would rise to meet it. What she did not do was invent the cookie. This is the part people always assume, and it is completely wrong. Juliette Gordon Low never stood in a kitchen dreaming up a fundraising empire built on sugar and cardboard. The cookie came later, and it came from the girls themselves, which is exactly how she would have wanted it. She built the stage. She simply had no idea what kind of show her performers were about to put on. By the time she died in 1927, the organisation she started had grown into the tens of thousands, and it was still climbing. She never saw the freezers full of thin mints, never watched a 9-year-old out-negotiate a grown adult outside a supermarket, never witnessed the 200 million box seasons to come. She just lit the match and trusted the girls to carry the flame, and carry it they did. Because a few years into her grand experiment in a high school cafeteria in Oklahoma, a troupe was about to have an idea so simple, so obvious, and so quietly world-conquering that even the endlessly imaginative Juliette could never have predicted it. In 1917, just 5 years after the Girl Scouts began, a troupe in Muskogee, Oklahoma, known as the Mistletoe Troupe, had a simple, dangerous idea. They would bake cookies in their own kitchens and sell them in their high school cafeteria to raise money for their activities. There was no marketing plan, no logo, no box, just girls, ovens, and ambition. The profits, fittingly for the era, went towards sending gifts to the doughboys fighting overseas in the First World War. It was a tiny gesture in a small Oklahoma town, the sort of thing that should have been forgotten within a season. Instead, other troops heard about it, leaned in, and quietly asked the most powerful question in business history. What if we did that too? Picture the scene. Muskogee in 1917 was a growing town on the edge of the old frontier, dusty and hopeful, the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, and news travelled faster than any newspaper could print it. The country was at war, patriotism was running hot, and these girls wanted to help. So they did the most sensible thing imaginable. They baked. There was nothing fancy about it. These were simple sugar cookies, the sort any home baker could manage with butter, sugar, flour, and eggs. The girls creamed the ingredients by hand, rolled the dough, and slid tray after tray into ovens that ran on wood or coal and had exactly 0 temperature dials. Getting an even bake was less a science and more a negotiation with fate. Yet somehow, batch by batch, they produced enough cookies to actually sell. The cafeteria sale itself was almost aggressively wholesome. There were no elaborate booths, no seasonal marketing campaign, no slogan designed by a committee. There was a table, a stack of homemade cookies, and a group of determined girls looking their classmates and teachers directly in the eye. And it worked. People bought cookies, money changed hands, and a portion of it was sent off to support soldiers overseas, turning a bake sale into a small act of wartime service. If you had stood in that cafeteria and announced that these girls were witnessing the birth of a nearly billion-dollar national enterprise, you would have been gently escorted out of the building. It looked like nothing. It looked like a nice thing children did once. History is full of these moments, the ones that seem utterly insignificant until you check back 100 years later and realized the whole world quietly bent around them. What made it spread was not the recipe, it was the idea. Other troops in other towns heard what the Mistletoe Girls had done and recognized instantly that they could do it too. There was no franchise agreement, no central command issuing orders. The concept simply passed from troop to troop the way good ideas always do, by word of mouth and by envy. A troop in one state would hear that a troop in another had funded an entire year of activities selling cookies, and the math became impossible to ignore. Today, the town of Muskogee marks the moment with a statue of a Girl Scout standing at the entrance to a local museum. A quiet monument to the afternoon, a bake sale accidentally became a dynasty. It is a fitting tribute, honouring not a general or a tycoon, but a group of teenage girls who solved a problem with an oven. They had no idea what they had started. They just needed money for their troop, and cookies were what they had. Next, that homemade operation would spread into kitchens all across the country, one flour-covered table at a time. For more than a decade, the entire enterprise ran on flour-dusted kitchen tables across America, with mothers volunteering as unpaid technical advisors and quality control. There were no factories, no conveyor belts, just girls creaming butter and sugar by hand while a parent hovered nearby whispering that the oven ran hot. Every cookie was slightly different, which today we would call artisanal, and back then they simply called Tuesday. It was slow, sticky, gloriously inefficient work, and yet in that domestic chaos something important was being learned. These girls were not just baking, they were running a supply chain, managing inventory, and answering to customers, all before they were old enough to drive a horse into town. The home kitchen of the 1920s was not a gentle place to run a business. Ovens were temperamental beasts fueled by wood, coal, or unreliable gas, and they did not come with helpful digital readouts. A skilled baker judged the heat by holding a hand near the door, by watching how quickly a scrap of dough browned, or by simple grim experience. Burnt batches were common, so were undercooked ones. The margin between a perfect cookie and a small tragedy was measured in minutes and mood, and yet the girls persisted, batch after batch, filling the house with the warm smell of sugar and the low hum of maternal supervision. The mothers were essential to the whole operation, though they never appeared on any ledger. They knew the ovens, they knew the recipes, they knew crucially how to keep a dozen excited children from setting the kitchen on fire while producing something actually edible. They were the original operations managers, and they worked entirely for free, motivated by nothing more than love and the vague hope of one day reclaiming their own kitchen. There was no standardization, which meant no two batches were ever quite the same. One girl's cookies came out thin and crisp, another's came out soft and slightly rebellious. The recipe was a suggestion, not a law, and the results reflected the personality of whoever happened to be stirring the bowl. In a modern corporation, this would trigger a quality control crisis and several tense meetings. In 1923, it simply meant your neighbour's cookies tasted a little different from your cousin's, and everyone accepted this as the natural order of things. But look closer at what was actually happening on those messy tables, and you see something remarkable. These girls were learning to estimate how much dough they needed. They were figuring out how many cookies they could produce in an afternoon. They were tracking who had bought what, collecting money, making change, and delivering a product on time. That is inventory management, production planning, and customer service, all bundled into what looked like a wholesome afternoon activity. They were absorbing the fundamentals of running a business the way children absorb everything without realizing they were being taught anything at all. The whole thing was gloriously inefficient by modern standards. There were no economies of scale, no consistent packaging, no way to guarantee that the cookie a customer bought this week would taste like the one they bought last week. If you had shown this operation to a business consultant, they would have wept. And yet it worked, because the inefficiency was never really the point. The point was the girls, their effort, and their steadily growing confidence. Still, an operation like this could only grow so far on kitchen tables alone. What it lacked was a shared standard, a single reliable recipe that any troop anywhere could follow. And in 1922, in the pages of a humble magazine, exactly that quietly arrived. In July of 1922, a Girl Scout publication called American Girl magazine printed something that would quietly change everything. An actual recipe. It came from Florence E. Neal, a local director in Chicago who had shared it with the roughly 2,000 Girl Scouts in her council. She did the math too, estimating that the ingredients for 6 or 7 dozen cookies would cost somewhere between 26 and 36 cents. Her suggested selling price was 25 or 30 cents per dozen. Read that again slowly, because buried in a humble magazine column was a full business model. Cost, margin and price point, handed to thousands of girls at once. It was possibly the first franchise instruction manual most of them would ever hold. Before that column ran, every troop was essentially reinventing the cookie from scratch. One town's recipe bore no relation to another's. There was no shared standard, no common product, nothing that tied the whole scattered effort together beyond the general idea of selling something sweet. Florence Neal changed that with a few paragraphs of print. She gave the movement a common language, and that language was a simple sugar cookie. What makes her contribution so quietly brilliant is that she did not just print a recipe, she printed the economics. She told those girls what the ingredients would cost and what they should charge, which meant she handed them the single most important concept in all of commerce, the difference between what you spend and what you earn. Spend around 30 cents on ingredients, sell the results for far more than that, and the gap in the middle is yours to keep. For a generation of girls, that column may have been the first time anyone laid out, in plain terms, exactly how a business makes money. Think about how sophisticated that actually is. She was not merely encouraging a bake sale. She was distributing a repeatable model that could be copied by any troop in any town with access to an oven and a magazine subscription. It was, in every meaningful sense, an early franchise handbook, minus the lawyers and the corporate retreat. A girl in Ohio and a girl in Oregon could now follow the same instructions and produce essentially the same product at essentially the same price. Consistency had entered the picture, and consistency is the quiet engine behind every empire ever built. The cookies themselves were nothing to write home about, which is precisely why they worked. They were honest, plain sugar cookies, the kind that pair perfectly with a cup of coffee and demand nothing of the person eating them. There was no exotic flavour, no complicated technique, nothing that required a skilled hand. Simplicity was the feature, not the flaw. Anyone could make them, which meant everyone could sell them. The reach of that single magazine issue is easy to underestimate from where we stand today, drowning in recipes available at the tap of a screen. But in 1922, a printed recipe distributed to thousands of girls at once was a genuine act of mass coordination. It was the closest thing the movement had to a broadcast, and it broadcast exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment. Florence Neal probably had no idea she was doing anything historic. She was a local director sharing a useful recipe with the girls in her care. but she had accidentally written the first page of an operating manual for an enterprise that would one day move hundreds of millions of boxes a year. And that recipe was about to fund something more meaningful than anyone expected, because the money it generated belonged, remarkably, to the women who earned it. Here is a detail that history loves to skip. In the 1920s, most women in America could not open their own checking accounts, which meant every cookie sale had to be conducted in cold, glorious cash. On the surface, it was a fundraiser. Underneath, it was something quietly radical. Mothers and daughters were raising money, controlling it, and deciding how to spend it, in a world that gave women almost no financial independence at all. The cookie was sweet, but the freedom was sweeter. These small piles of coins on kitchen tables were, in their modest way, a rebellion you could eat, and nobody in charge seemed to notice what was actually being built. To appreciate how significant this was, you have to sit for a moment with just how little financial power women held in that era. A woman often could not take out a loan in her own name. She frequently could not open a bank account without a husband or father co-signing, if she could open one at all. Her economic life was, by design, routed through a man. The system was not subtle about this. It simply assumed that money was men's business and expected everyone to nod along. Into this world walked the Girl Scout cookie, an operation run largely by women and girls, generating real money that flowed through female hands from start to finish. The girls baked the cookies. The girls sold the cookies. The mothers organized, supervised, and managed. And the coins that came back, honest, spendable American currency, were controlled by the very people the financial system had tried to keep away from money entirely. Because so few women could use a bank, the whole thing ran on cash. And cash has a wonderful quality. It is immediate, it is tangible, and it answers to whoever is holding it. There was no account for a bank to freeze, no co-signer whose permission was required, no institution standing between a woman and the fruits of her own labour. The money sat on the kitchen table in small stacks of coins and bills, and the women who had earned it got to decide all by themselves what happened to it next. That decision usually went straight back into the girls. It funded camping trips, activities, uniforms, and experiences that widen these young lives in ways their mothers had rarely been allowed. In other words, women were taking money they had earned through their own effort and reinvesting it directly into the futures of the next generation of women, all without asking a single man for permission. If that is not quietly revolutionary, nothing is. Nobody framed it that way at the time, of course. On the surface it looked utterly harmless, even charming. Girls selling cookies, mothers helping out, a little money raised for wholesome activities. Who could possibly object to something so sweet? And that was exactly the genius of it, though it was an accidental genius. The whole enterprise was so thoroughly disguised as domestic and adorable that no one thought to be threatened by it. A group of men who might have blocked a woman from a bank loan would happily buy a box of cookies from that same woman's daughter without ever connecting the two. So the cookie became a small loophole in a rigged system, a way for women to build financial muscle in the one arena society had dismissed as trivial. The trivial arena turned out to be enormously powerful, and that power was about to leave the kitchen entirely, marching straight out the front door and onto the porches of America, one determined knock at a time. By the 1920s, the operation went mobile. Girls packed their homemade sugar cookies into simple wax paper bags, slapped on a sticker label, and marched them door to door for 25 to 35 cents a dozen. This was long before anyone worried about strangers, sales scripts, or the awkward silence after a knock. A girl simply appeared on your porch, held up a bag of cookies, and stared into your soul until you found your coin purse. It was direct selling in its purest, most fearless form, and it trained a generation of children in the ancient art of the pitch, the follow-up, and the gentle, devastating guilt of a neighbour who says maybe next time. The packaging alone tells you how far the world has travelled. There was no shrink wrap, no tamper-proof seal, no printed nutrition panel, no branded box designed by a marketing department. There was a wax paper bag, the same humble material that kept sandwiches fresh, and a small sticker label to announce what was inside. That was the entire package. It was compostable before compostable was a word, and it required a level of trust between buyer and seller that feels almost alien today. And the selling itself was gloriously low-tech. A girl walked up to a house, knocked, and waited. When the door opened, she made her case, face-to-face, cookie in hand. There was no hiding behind a screen, no soft cushion of anonymity, no delete button. If the neighbour said no, the girl absorbed that rejection in real time, standing on the porch, and then walked to the next house to do it all over again. It was a masterclass in resilience delivered one door at a time, and it began roughly around the age most children today are still negotiating their bedtime. The economics were charmingly simple. A dozen cookies went for somewhere between 25 and 35 cents, a price low enough that almost anyone could justify it, and high enough to actually fund a troop. Multiply a modest price by a determined child covering an entire neighbourhood, and the coins added up faster than anyone expected. There is a reason door-to-door selling dominated commerce for so long. When it works, and few salespeople in history have worked harder or been harder to refuse than a hopeful Girl Scout on your doorstep. What the girls were absorbing, without ever being told, was the complete anatomy of a sale. They learned the pitch, that first crucial line that had to be friendly, clear, and quick before the door closed. They learned to read a face, to sense whether a customer was warming up or looking for an exit. They learned the follow-up, circling back to houses that had said maybe later, because maybe later is where a surprising number of sales quietly live. And they learned to handle the neighbour who smiled kindly, praised the cookies, and still somehow bought nothing at all. That particular neighbour deserves special mention, because every child who ever sold anything door-to-door knows the type. The one who compliments everything, asks warm questions, expresses genuine enthusiasm, and then delivers a soft and total no wrapped in so much friendliness that you almost thank them for it. Learning to survive that encounter, to smile and move on undeterred, is a life skill worth more than most college courses. By the late 20s, this porch-to-porch army had turned the cookie into a familiar feature of American neighborhoods. But the country was about to change dramatically, and the cookie would have to prove it could survive the worst economy in living memory. Then came the Great Depression, when money evaporated and every household counted its pennies twice. You might think this would have crushed a business built on selling treats to broke people. Instead, it did the opposite. In 1933, former First Lady and devoted Girl Scout Lou Henry Hoover helped inspire the first truly national push for cookie sales, reframing them as a way for communities to pull together when times were hard. Suddenly buying a box of cookies was not indulgence, it was solidarity. It was a small, affordable act of hope in the middle of a very unhopeful decade, and it turned a scattered idea into a nationwide movement almost overnight. The logic seems backward at first. In an economy where families were losing homes, jobs, and savings, who on earth would spend money on cookies? Yet this is where human nature refuses to behave the way spreadsheets predict. When people have almost nothing, small comforts become enormous. A 25-cent bag of cookies was one of the few luxuries a struggling family could still occasionally afford. A tiny pocket of sweetness in a decade defined by going without. There was also something deeper at work. Buying a box of Girl Scout cookies during the Depression was not really about the cookies. It was about belonging to something larger than your own struggle. It was about supporting the local girls, backing a community effort, and participating in a small ritual of normalcy, while the wider world seemed to be falling apart. In hard times, people crave connection, and the cookie offered connection at a price almost anyone could still scrape together. Lou Henry Hoover understood this instinctively. As a former First Lady and a genuine believer in the Girl Scouts, she carried real influence, and she used it to help elevate the cookie from a patchwork of local sales into a coordinated national idea. She helped frame the whole enterprise as something wholesome and unifying, a way for the country to rally around its girls at precisely the moment the country badly needed something to rally around. Her endorsement gave the cookie a kind of respectability and reach it had never had before. This national framing changed the scale of everything. Instead of thousands of troops each doing their own scattered thing, the movement began to think of itself as a single, coordinated effort. The cookie was no longer just a clever local fundraiser. It was becoming an American institution, a shared seasonal event that communities across the country could participate in together. That shift in thinking, from many small efforts to one large movement, is the moment a modest idea starts becoming an empire. The timing was, against all odds, perfect. The Depression forced the movement to prove that the cookie was recession-proof, that it could survive and even thrive when money was scarce. And it passed the test spectacularly. A product that can sell during the worst economy in modern history is a product with staying power, because if people will buy it when they have nothing, they will absolutely buy it when they have something. There is a quiet lesson buried in this chapter, one that plenty of modern businesses spend fortunes failing to learn. People do not only buy things because they are useful, they buy things because of what those things mean, because of the feeling attached to the purchase. The Depression turned a simple cookie into a small symbol of hope, and symbols, unlike snacks, never really go out of season. With a national identity taking shape, the cookie was ready to get clever about where and how it sold, and one Philadelphia idea was about to prove just how clever. One of the strangest and most brilliant early sales happened in Philadelphia, where enterprising Girl Scouts set up shop selling cookies right at the windows of the local gas and electric company. Picture it. You're trudging in to pay your utility bill during the worst economy in living memory, and there, waiting for you, is a child offering you a cookie. It was ambush marketing before the term existed, positioning the product exactly where money was already changing hands. It was clever, it was a little ruthless, and it worked beautifully. The girls had figured out a truth that modern corporations pay consultants millions to rediscover. Meet the customer where the wallet is already open. To grasp the sheer cunning of this, you have to understand the emotional state of a person paying a utility bill during the Depression. This was not a happy errand. Money was tight. The bill was probably higher than they wanted, and every trip to the gas company was a small reminder of how precarious life had become. It was, on paper, the worst possible place to try to sell someone a treat, which is exactly why it was genius, because the girls understood something subtle about that moment. A person paying a bill already has their money out. The coin purse is open, the wallet is in hand, the mental barrier between wanting and spending has already been crossed. In that fragile window, adding a small, affordable, wholesome purchase feels almost effortless. You have already resigned yourself to parting with money. What is another 25 cents, especially when a hopeful child is offering you something sweet to soften the sting of the bill? This is a principle that modern retail obsesses over and spends staggering sums to engineer. It is why stores place small treats and impulse buys right at the checkout counter, in the exact spot where your wallet is already open and your resistance is already low. It is why the little rack of candy sits beside the register and not in a distant corner of the shop. The girls in Philadelphia discovered this truth decades early, armed with nothing but common sense and a table full of cookies. The placement also did something kind, whether the girls intended it or not. It took one of the least pleasant errands in a person's month and attached a small moment of warmth to it. You came to pay a bill you resented and left with a bag of cookies and a memory of a friendly child. The gas company probably had no idea it was hosting the most emotionally intelligent sales operation in the city, quietly turning bill payers into cookie customers at the exact point of maximum vulnerability. And it was not manipulation in any dark sense. The cookies were good, the price was fair, and the money supported the girls. It was simply smart, the kind of instinctive marketing wisdom that cannot be taught in a classroom because it comes from actually understanding people. The girls were not running focus groups or analysing consumer behaviour. They just noticed where the money was and stood there. That instinct, positioning the cookie exactly where customers were already primed to spend, would echo through the entire history of the enterprise. It is the same logic that would one day plant cookie booths at the entrances of grocery stores, catching shoppers on their way to buy food while already in a spending mindset. The gas company window was the humble ancestor of every strategically placed booth to come. Clever placement could only take homemade cookies so far, though. To truly grow, the operation needed something the kitchen table could never provide: a factory. Around 1934, the Philadelphia Girl Scout Council did something that would separate the cookie from its kitchen table roots forever. They contracted with an actual commercial bakery to make the cookies for them. This was a quiet turning point, the moment the operation stopped being purely homemade and started becoming an industry. No more running the oven hot, no more slightly different cookies in every bag. A machine somewhere was now producing them by the thousands, uniform and endless. Something was gained, mainly scale, and something was lost, mainly the smell of a real kitchen. But the numbers were undeniable, and in business the numbers usually win. The problem the homemade model faced was simple and unforgiving. There's only so much a girl and her mother can bake in an afternoon. The oven holds what it holds. The day has the hours it has. No matter how determined the troop, the kitchen table has a ceiling, and by the early 1930s, demand for cookies was starting to bump against that ceiling hard. When more people want your product than you can possibly make, you have a wonderful problem, and there is really only one way to solve it. Enter the commercial bakery, an operation built to produce not dozens of cookies but thousands upon thousands, at speeds no home kitchen could dream of matching. Where a girl rolled dough by hand, the bakery had machinery. Where a mother judged the oven by feel, the bakery had controlled, consistent heat. The bakery never got tired, never had homework, and never had to stop baking to go to school in the morning. It simply produced, hour after hour, cookie after identical cookie. That word, identical, is the heart of the whole shift. The homemade era had been defined by charming inconsistency, every batch a little different depending on who baked it. The commercial bakery erased that variability overnight. Now a cookie bought on one street tasted exactly like a cookie bought across town. This is called standardization, and while it sounds dull, it is one of the most powerful forces in all of business. Customers love knowing exactly what they're going to get. Reliability breeds trust, and trust breeds repeat purchases. Of course, something real was surrendered in the trade. The homemade cookie carried a warmth that no factory can replicate, not in flavor exactly, but in meaning. When a girl handed you a cookie she had baked in her own kitchen, you were buying a piece of genuine personal effort. The commercial cookie, however consistent and however delicious, came from a machine. The smell of a real kitchen, the slight imperfections, the sense that a child's hands had shaped this specific cookie, all of that faded into memory. But sentiment rarely wins against scale. The council could now sell far more cookies, fund far more activities, and reach far more customers than the kitchen table ever allowed. The girls were freed from the exhausting labor of mass baking and could focus their energy where it mattered most, on the selling. And selling, as it turned out, was the thing they were truly extraordinary at. The bakery made the cookies, the girls moved them. It was a division of labor that would define the enterprise forever. This was the cookie growing up, trading the intimacy of the home kitchen for the reach of industry. It was a little bittersweet and enormously smart, and it set the stage for the next leap, the moment the cookie stopped being just a product and became something far more valuable, a genuine, recognizable brand. In 1935, the Girl Scout Federation of Greater New York made a decision that sounds small and was actually enormous. They bought their own cookie die shaped like a trefoil, the Scout emblem, and printed the words Girl Scout Cookies right on the box. In one move, they turned a generic baked good into a brand. Now the cookie had a shape, a name and packaging, the holy trinity of consumer recognition. A customer no longer bought a bag of cookies from a nice child. They bought Girl Scout cookies, a product with an identity you could spot across a room. The girls had, almost by accident, invented one of the most durable brands America would ever produce. Consider what a cookie was before this moment. It was honestly just a cookie. A round, pleasant, homemade sugar cookie, indistinguishable from any other round, pleasant, homemade sugar cookie. If a customer enjoyed it, they had no easy way to seek out more of the same because there was nothing to point to, no name to remember, no shape to recognize. The product was good but anonymous, and anonymous products are forgettable products. The trefoil die changed that in an instant. By pressing the Scout emblem directly into the cookie, the New York Federation gave the product a visual signature, a little stamp of identity baked right into the dough. Now the cookie did not just taste a certain way, it looked a certain way, unmistakably. A person could glance at it and know exactly what it was and exactly who made it. That recognition is the foundation of every powerful brand on earth, from soft drinks to sneakers. Make yourself instantly identifiable, and you make yourself impossible to forget. Then came the second stroke, printing the words Girl Scout Cookies on the box. This may sound obvious to modern ears, drenched as we are in branding from birth. But in 1935 it was a genuine leap. Naming the product on its packaging transformed it from a thing into a thing with a name, and named things behave completely differently in the human mind. People do not develop loyalty to generic cookies. They develop loyalty to a brand they can ask for by name, request again, and recommend to a friend. Suddenly a customer was not saying they had bought some cookies from the local girls. They were saying they had bought Girl Scout cookies, a specific product with a specific identity. The name did the work of memory and marketing simultaneously. It travelled from person to person, easy to repeat and easy to recall. Word of mouth, already the movement's greatest weapon, now had a proper name to carry, and a name is far more contagious than a vague description. The packaging itself completed the transformation. A box announced that this was a real product, something manufactured, official, and worth buying, not just a loose handful of homemade treats in a paper bag. The shape, the name, and the box together turned the cookie into something a customer could recognize, request, and trust from across a room. Exactly the recognition that separates a lasting brand from a passing fad. What makes this so remarkable is that it almost certainly did not feel historic to anyone involved. A regional federation made a practical decision to distinguish their cookies and look a bit more professional. They were not sitting in a boardroom plotting to build an iconic American brand. They were just trying to sell cookies well, and in doing so, they accidentally created one of the most recognizable brands the country would ever know. With a shape, a name, and a box in hand, the cookie was ready for its biggest move yet, going truly national under the watchful eye of licensed bakers coast to coast. By 1936, the demand was too big for scattered local deals, so the National Girl Scout organization did the truly corporate thing. It began licensing commercial bakers to produce official cookies for councils across the country, starting with a bakery called Keebler Whale. This is the moment a fundraiser quietly became a franchise. Standards, contracts, and quality control entered the picture. The cookie was no longer a regional curiosity. It was a national product with a licensing structure, which is a very grown-up phrase for a treat still sold by 10-year-olds. The girls kept the innocence and the charm. The organization wisely kept the paperwork. To understand why this mattered, picture the chaos that came before it. Different councils were striking their own separate deals with their own local bakeries, each producing cookies to their own standards, in their own shapes, with their own quality. A cookie from one region might bear no resemblance to a cookie from another. It was a patchwork, and while patchworks are charming, they are terrible for building a coherent national product. If the cookie was going to conquer the entire country, it needed to be the same cookie everywhere. Licensing solved this beautifully. By granting official permission to select commercial bakers, the national organization could set the rules for everyone at once. It could dictate standards, require consistency, and ensure that a box carrying the Girl Scout name actually lived up to that name no matter where in the country it was sold. This is the same principle that governs every great franchise on Earth. The whole point of a franchise is that the product is reliable everywhere, so a customer knows exactly what they are getting whether they are buying in one state or another. The first baker brought into this new arrangement was Keebler Whale, and with that contract the cookie stepped decisively out of the world of amateur fundraising and into the world of real industry. There were now formal agreements, defined expectations, and a chain of accountability. If a baker cut corners or failed to meet the standard, there was a structure in place to address it. This was no longer girls and mothers hoping the batch turned out. This was a managed, contractual, professional operation. And yet, and this is the quiet genius of the whole thing, none of that corporate machinery ever showed its face to the customer. The person buying a box still bought it from a bright-eyed child on a doorstep or at a table. The contracts, the licensing agreements, the quality control standards, all of it hummed along invisibly in the background while the customer experienced only the charm. The girls remained the face of the operation. The business apparatus stayed politely out of sight. This separation is precisely what made the model so powerful and so durable. Customers got the warmth of buying from a local girl. The organisation got the reliability and scale of professional manufacturing. Both halves worked together seamlessly, each doing what it did best. The girls sold, the bakers baked, the national office managed, and the cookie became something no purely homemade operation could ever have become, a genuinely national product with a genuinely national reputation. It is worth pausing on the strangeness of it all. Somewhere there were contracts and licensing terms and industrial baking standards, the dull machinery of commerce, and it all existed to support the efforts of children selling treats for their troops. The grown-up structure served the childlike enterprise, not the other way around. And with that structure in place, the cookie was ready to explode across the country faster than anyone had dared to imagine. The licensing gamble paid off almost immediately. By 1937, more than 125 Girl Scout councils reported holding cookie sales, and new bakers were being added to keep up with the appetite. The thing was spreading like a delicious, well-organized wildfire. What had started with one troop in Oklahoma was now a coordinated national effort with multiple factories, standardized boxes, and an army of small, determined salespeople fanning out across the country. The infrastructure of a real business was clicking into place piece by piece, and nobody in America seemed remotely alarmed that the fastest growing food operation in the land was being run in large part by children. The speed of it is genuinely striking. Licensing began in 1936, and within a single year, more than 125 councils were running cookie sales. That is not gradual growth. That is an eruption. The moment the national structure removed the friction, the moment councils no longer had to figure everything out on their own, the whole enterprise leapt forward as if it had been waiting years for permission to run. This tells you something important about what the licensing system actually did. It did not create the demand. The demand was already there, waiting, straining against the limits of the old homemade patchwork. What licensing created was the ability to meet that demand. Suddenly, councils that had wanted to sell cookies but lacked the means to produce them at scale could simply plug into the new system. The bakers handled the making. The councils handled the selling. The barrier that had held everything back was gone. One baker alone could not possibly supply a nation of hungry customers, so more bakers were brought into the fold, each one adding capacity to the growing machine. This was the operation scaling in real time, adding production the way a growing company adds factories. Every new baker meant more cookies, and more cookies meant more councils could join, and more councils meant more girls selling, and more girls selling meant more demand, which meant the whole cycle spun faster and faster. It was a self-reinforcing loop, and self-reinforcing loops are how small things become enormous things. The standardized boxes deserve their own mention here, because they were quietly doing heavy lifting. As the operation went national, uniform packaging meant that the cookie presented the same face everywhere. A customer in one part of the country saw the same box, the same branding, the same reassuring familiarity as a customer hundreds of miles away. This consistency built a national reputation with remarkable efficiency. The cookie was becoming not just a local treat but a recognizable American thing, the same from coast to coast, and underneath it all marched the real engine, the girls themselves. No amount of factories or boxes or licensing agreements would have meant anything without the small, determined salespeople carrying the product to the customer. They were the distribution network, the sales force, and the marketing department all rolled into one, and they worked for the joy of it, and the pride of it, and the trip to camp at the end of it. No corporation on earth had a sales team quite like this one. By the close of 1937, the transformation was undeniable. In just 20 years, a single troops cafeteria bake sale had become a coordinated national enterprise with industrial production and a coast-to-coast reach. It was, by any measure, a stunning rise. But history had a cruel sense of timing, and the cookie was about to slam headfirst into a crisis that no clever licensing structure could solve. Then the world caught fire. The Second World War brought rationing, and suddenly the three ingredients the cookie depended on most, sugar, flour, and butter, became precious wartime resources. You cannot bake a nation of cookies without them, and for the first time the mighty cookie machine sputtered. It was genuine crisis for a program that had grown used to only going up. But if the Girl Scouts had proven anything across 3 decades, it was that they did not panic when the recipe stopped working. They simply changed the recipe, or in this case, changed the entire product. Necessity, as always, was about to become the mother of a surprisingly good idea. Rationing during the war was not a suggestion. It was a strict national system designed to funnel scarce resources toward the war effort, and the ingredients at the heart of the cookie were exactly the ones under the tightest control. Sugar was among the very first things rationed, tightly limited and carefully tracked. Butter and flour followed as the demands of feeding an army at war reshaped the entire food supply. These were not luxuries anymore. They were strategic materials, as essential to the war as steel and rubber. For an operation whose entire existence depended on those 3 ingredients, this was an existential problem. A cookie is, at its core, sugar and flour and butter transformed by heat. Take those away, or ration them down to a trickle, and there is quite simply no cookie to sell. The mighty enterprise that had survived the Great Depression, that had thrived when money vanished, now faced something money could not fix. You cannot buy your way around a national shortage. The ingredients were not expensive. They were unavailable. This was a different kind of test than the Depression had been. During the Depression, the challenge was convincing broke people to buy. The product itself was never in question. Now the challenge was more fundamental. The product itself could barely be made. It is one thing to struggle to sell what you have. It is another thing entirely to be unable to produce what you sell. Many businesses, faced with the disappearance of their core materials, simply close their doors and wait for better days. But the movement had a resilience baked into its very character, forged over decades of solving problems with whatever was at hand. These were, after all, the descendants of girls who had judged temperamental ovens by feel and sold cookies at gas company windows. Panic was not really in their vocabulary. When one path closed, they had always found another. And so, rather than mourning the cookie they could no longer make, they turned their attention to a simple and clarifying question. What did they actually have to offer that did not require sugar, flour, or butter? The answer, when it came, revealed the deepest truth about the entire operation. The real product had never truly been the cookie at all. The real product was the girls, their energy, their reach, their almost supernatural ability to sell. The cookie was merely the thing they happened to be selling, and if the cookie was temporarily impossible, then they would simply sell something else, and sell it just as well. That realization would carry the enterprise through the leanest years of the war, keeping the girls visible, active, and funded, even when their signature product had all but vanished from the shelves. The solution they landed on was so unexpected and so quietly brilliant that it deserves a chapter all its own. Unable to bake enough cookies, the Girl Scouts did something quietly genius in 1944. They sold calendars instead. Sounds almost funny. A cookie company pivoting to stationery, but it kept the fundraising engine running through the leanest years and kept the organisation visible in every home. Girls also collected cans of cooking fat for the war effort and sold war bonds at no profit, folding their little enterprise directly into the national cause. It was proof that the real product was never actually the cookie. The real product was the girls themselves, their reach, their energy, and their almost supernatural ability to sell you something you did not know you needed. The choice of a calendar was smarter than it first appears. A calendar requires no sugar, no flour, no butter, none of the rationed ingredients that had made cookies impossible. It could be produced without touching the war effort's precious food supply. And yet it kept the girls doing exactly what they did best. Knocking on doors, making their pitch, and collecting money for their troops. The product changed completely, but the machine that sold it, the girls and their unstoppable hustle, kept running without missing a beat. There was a lovely practicality to the calendar as well. Unlike a cookie, which is gone the moment it is eaten, a calendar hangs on a wall for an entire year. Every single day, a family would glance at it and be reminded quietly and constantly of the Girl Scouts. It was a small, year-long advertisement living in kitchens and hallways across the country. In marketing terms, a cookie offers a moment. A calendar offers a permanent daily presence. The girls had accidentally traded a fleeting product for a lasting one. But the girls did not stop at calendars. They threw themselves into the war effort in ways that went far beyond fundraising. They collected cans of cooking fat, a genuinely valuable wartime material used in the production of explosives, turning kitchen waste into a contribution to the national cause. They sold war bonds and took no profit from doing so, lending their formidable selling talents directly to the country when the country needed them most. In a time of shared sacrifice, the girls made sure they were part of the sacrifice, not standing on the sidelines. This mattered enormously for the reputation of the whole enterprise. During the war, the girls were not seen as children hawking treats. They were seen as young citizens doing their part, pitching in alongside everyone else during the nation's most difficult hour. Every can of fat collected, every bond sold, every calendar purchased wove the girls more tightly into the fabric of American life. When the war eventually ended, the movement emerged not diminished, but strengthened, its standing in the community higher than ever. And here is the deeper lesson that the calendar years revealed so clearly. A lesser operation, one that truly believed it was only a cookie business, might have simply shut down and waited for the sugar to return. But this operation understood, perhaps only instinctively, that its true asset was not any single product. Its true asset was the girls, their relationships with their neighbours, their reach into every home, and their remarkable gift for persuasion. Give that asset calendar, a bond, a can to collect, and it performed just as well as it had with cookies. So the enterprise survived the war intact, its network preserved, its reputation enhanced, its girls busier than ever. And when peace finally came and the sugar and flour and butter flooded back onto the shelves, the cookie did not merely return. It came back with a force that would dwarf everything that had come before. When the war ended and the ingredients came flooding back, the cookie did not simply return, it erupted. By 1948, a remarkable 29 commercial bakers were licensed to produce Girl Scout cookies. all racing to feed a country hungry for a normal life and small pleasures again. Post-war America wanted comfort, prosperity, and sweetness, and here was a product that delivered all three in a tidy box sold by a smiling child. The pent-up demand of the war years released all at once. The cookie was no longer just surviving. It was booming, expanding, and quietly preparing to become a permanent fixture of the American calendar year. Jump from a handful of bakers before the war to 29 by 1948, and you begin to grasp the scale of the surge. This was not steady, measured growth. This was a dam breaking. For years, Americans had gone without so much, denying themselves comforts, tightening belts, and swallowing sacrifice for the sake of the war. When that pressure finally lifted, the release was enormous, and it flowed straight into every small pleasure the country had missed. The cookie was perfectly positioned to catch that wave. There is a psychology to the years right after a long hardship that the cookie tapped into perfectly. People who have gone without for a long time do not return to normal cautiously. They return to it with appetite. They want to enjoy things again, to indulge a little, to reclaim the ordinary sweetness that the hard years had stolen. Post-war America was in exactly this mood, flush with a growing prosperity and eager to spend on the small comforts it had been denied. A box of cookies sold by a cheerful child was practically the ideal purchase for such a moment. The sheer number of licensed bakers tells the story of the demand. 29 bakeries were needed, all working, all producing, all racing to keep the shelves stocked, because the appetite of the country was simply that vast. Each of those bakers represented real production capacity, real factories humming to meet a hunger that seemed almost bottomless. The infrastructure that had nearly ground to a halt during the war years came roaring back, larger and more capable than it had ever been. This was also the era when America itself was changing shape in ways that would suit the cookie enormously. Families were growing, optimism was rising, and a new kind of prosperous, comfortable life was taking root across the country. Into this hopeful, spending, expanding America, the cookie arrived like an old friend returning after a long absence. It fit the mood of the moment as if it had been designed for it. Wholesome and affordable and reassuring, a small taste of the good life that everyone was suddenly chasing. And crucially, the cookie was becoming something more than an occasional treat. It was becoming an expectation, a seasonal event that people began to anticipate and rely upon. The idea was taking hold that every year at a certain time the cookies would come, and you would buy them, and this would simply be part of the rhythm of American life. That shift from an occasional purchase to an annual ritual is one of the most valuable things that can ever happen to a product. Rituals do not have to be sold again from scratch each year. They sell themselves. The post-war boom had transformed the cookie from a survivor into a phenomenon. But an operation growing this fast, with this many bakers producing this many cookies, faced a new and unglamorous challenge. With so many different bakeries involved, how could anyone make sure that a cookie was a cookie, the same everywhere, every time? By 1951, the sprawling variety of homemade recipes had been streamlined into 3 dependable options: a peanut butter sandwich cookie, a shortbread, and a chocolate mint. Those 3 humble varieties are the ancestors of the cookies you fight over today, the ones now known as do-si-dos, trefoils, and the legendary thin mints. This was the cookie growing up and specializing, learning that a business does not need 100 products. It needs a few that people cannot live without. The menu had been carved down to its most addictive essentials, and in doing so, the organization discovered the true secret weapon of the entire operation. That weapon was mint. The move toward a small, focused menu runs against every instinct an amateur has about selling. The amateur thinks that more choices mean more sales, that offering 50 kinds of cookie will please 50 kinds of customer. But experienced businesses know the opposite is usually true. Too much choice overwhelms people, muddies the brand, and complicates production. 3 strong options, each one excellent, each one distinct, beats 50 mediocre ones every single time. The cookie had learned this lesson, and the result was a menu sharpened to a fine point. Look at how cleverly those 3 varieties covered the full range of what people want in a sweet. The peanut butter sandwich offered richness and heartiness, a substantial cookie for people who wanted something satisfying. The shortbread, descended directly from that original simple sugar cookie of the early years, offered the plain, buttery, timeless comfort that never goes out of style. And the chocolate mint offered something cool, crisp, and distinctive, a flavor with real personality. Between the 3, nearly every customer could find a favorite. The menu was small, but it was complete. That chocolate mint, though, was destined for something greater than the other 2. There was something about the combination of dark, crisp chocolate and cool, bright mint that struck a chord far deeper than anyone could have predicted. It was refreshing and rich at the same time, a small contradiction that the human palate finds almost impossible to resist. People did not merely like it, they became devoted to it, in a way that ordinary cookies rarely inspire. The mint had a magic the others lacked. That cookie, of course, would grow into the legendary Thin Mint, the undisputed champion of the entire lineup, the one people hoard in freezers and ration through the long months and rank above all others. But its greatness was already visible here, in 1951, in its very first form. Some products announce their future from the moment they arrive, and the mint cookie was one of them. It was not just another option on the menu. It was the future flagship of an empire quietly waiting to be crowned. The decision to specialize also solved a practical problem that the post-war boom had created. With so many bakers now producing cookies, a focused menu was far easier to standardize than a sprawling one. 3 well-defined cookies could be made consistently across many bakeries. 50 loosely defined ones could not. By carving the menu down to its essentials, the organization made its cookies both more beloved and more reliable at the same time, a rare and beautiful combination. This was the cookie discovering its own identity, choosing what it wanted to be and letting go of the rest. The classics were born, the flagship was quietly identified, and the product line took the shape it would essentially keep for the rest of its history. With its menu perfected and its icon in the making, the cookie was ready to follow its customers into an entirely new American landscape, one built of parking lots and shining new stores. As the 1950s rolled on and America moved to the suburbs, the cookie followed the customer straight into the shining new shopping mall. No longer content with door-to-door alone, girls began setting up sales in the places where post-war families now gathered, shopped and strolled. This was a masterstroke of location. Instead of chasing customers one porch at a time, the cookie planted itself in the path of foot traffic and simply waited. It is the ancestor of the booth you still walk past outside your grocery store, the one that ambushes you between the parking lot and the milk. The girls had learned once again to stand exactly where the wallets walk by. The America of the 1950s was reshaping itself dramatically. Families were leaving crowded cities for the open space of the suburbs, and with them came a brand new way of living, one built around the automobile, the subdivision, and above all the shopping centre. These gleaming new commercial hubs became the gathering places of suburban life, where people came not just to shop but to spend an afternoon, to see and be seen, to move through their week. Where the people went, the cookie sensibly followed. The strategic beauty of the shopping centre is that it concentrated exactly the kind of person the cookie wanted to reach. Door-to-door selling, for all its charm, was hard, slow work. A girl walked from house to house, and at each stop she found exactly one household, which might or might not be home, which might or might not want cookies. The effort per customer was high. But a shopping centre gathered hundreds of potential customers into a single place, all of them already out, already relaxed, already carrying money and in the mood to spend it. One well-placed booth could reach more people in an hour than a full afternoon of knocking on doors. And these were customers in a particularly agreeable state of mind. A person out shopping has already decided to spend money. Their wallet is out, their spending resistance is low, and they are moving through a pleasant environment with time to spare. This is the very same principle the girls had stumbled upon decades earlier at the Philadelphia Gas Company windows, now applied on a far grander scale. Position yourself where people are already spending, and selling becomes effortless. The shopping centre was that principle multiplied 100-fold. There was also a wonderful passivity to the new approach that made it far more efficient than the old one. Door to door, the girl had to go and find each customer, expending energy to reach every single person. At a shopping centre booth, the customers came to her. She simply set up in a good spot and let the river of foot traffic flow past, and a steady fraction of that river would stop, drawn by the cookies, the cause, or the sheer difficulty of walking past a hopeful child. The girl no longer had to chase, she only had to be there. This is the direct ancestor of the cookie booth that still catches you today, the one stationed at the entrance of the grocery store, positioned with quiet precision right in the path between your car and the door you need to walk through. You cannot avoid it. That is entirely the point, and it is a point the girls figured out in the 1950s as the suburbs bloomed around them. The booth does not need to find you. It only needs to stand where you are already going to walk. The shift to the shopping centre was the cookie mastering the geography of modern American life. And American life was about to hand the enterprise its single greatest gift. A wave of children so vast it would send cookie sales into the stratosphere. The 1960s handed the cookie its greatest fuel yet, a tidal wave of children. The baby boom swelled Girl Scout membership to enormous numbers, and more scouts meant more sellers, more households reached, and more boxes moving than ever before. It was simple, beautiful arithmetic. A business built on the labour and charm of girls suddenly had more girls than at any point in its history. Dining rooms across the country filled with stacked cases of cookies, and a whole generation grew up either selling the things or being relentlessly sold to. The cookie was no longer a program. It was becoming a rite of passage, woven quietly into the fabric of American childhood. To grasp what happened, you have to understand the baby boom itself. In the years following the war, American families had children in staggering numbers, producing a generation so large it would bend the entire country around it for decades. Everything designed for children suddenly needed to be bigger, from schools to neighborhoods to summer camps. And an organization built entirely around girls found itself, almost overnight, with a membership swelling to sizes it had never come close to before. For an enterprise powered by the labour of girls, this was the equivalent of striking oil. Every new scout was a new salesperson, a new pair of hands to carry cookies to a new set of neighbours. The sales force did not grow gradually. It exploded, expanding in lockstep with the enormous generation flooding into the ranks. More girls meant more doors knocked, more booths staffed, more households reached, and inevitably more boxes sold. The arithmetic was as simple as it was powerful, and it all pointed relentlessly upward. The dining rooms of America tell the story better than any statistic. Across the country, families found their homes temporarily conquered by cookies, with cases stacked in corners, boxes covering tables, and the logistics of a small distribution operation unfolding in the middle of ordinary domestic life. A mother volunteering to manage her troops' cookies might watch her dining room vanish beneath a mountain of inventory for weeks. This was the cookie at full industrial scale, and yet it still ran through the living rooms and dining rooms of regular families exactly as it always had. Something deeper was happening too, something that would prove even more valuable than the raw sales numbers. An entire generation was growing up with the cookie as a fixed part of childhood. For the enormous baby boom generation, the cookie was not a novelty or an occasional thing. It was simply always there, a reliable feature of the year, as expected as the changing seasons. Whether they were selling the cookies themselves or being pursued by a neighbor's daughter selling them, these children absorbed the cookie into their understanding of what normal life looked like. This is how a product stops being a product and becomes a tradition. When an entire generation grows up considering something a natural part of life, that thing gains a permanence that no advertising campaign can buy. The boomers would carry their fondness for the cookie into adulthood and then pass it down to their own children, ensuring the ritual renewed itself generation after generation. The cookie was embedding itself into the American memory, and memories like that last for lifetimes. The 1960s, then, were a golden age of sheer volume, the cookie riding the largest wave of children the country had ever produced. But behind the scenes, out of view of the customers and the cheerful booths, the business of actually producing all these cookies was quietly consolidating into the hands of a few powerful giants. Behind the scenes, the business of actually baking all these cookies was consolidating into the hands of a few very large players. One bakery, Bury, grew into the dominant national supplier during the 1960s, churning out cookies on an industrial scale that the Mistletoe Troupe could never have imagined. This was big food now, with contracts, factories, and serious money moving through the system. The charming image out front, girls with boxes and bright smiles, was increasingly supported by a powerful commercial machine humming out of sight. The genius of the whole arrangement was that customers only ever saw the child, never the factory. And that, more than any flavour, was the recipe for trust. The consolidation made a certain unavoidable sense, as the baby boom sent cookie demand soaring. Producing the sheer volume required favoured the biggest and most capable bakeries. A small operation simply could not keep pace with the nation of boomers wanting cookies. The large bakers, with their vast factories and industrial efficiency, could produce at a scale and a cost that smaller ones could not match. Naturally, the biggest players began to dominate, and one of them, Bury, rose to become the leading supplier in the entire country. The distance between Bury's operation and the Mistletoe Troupe's kitchen is almost dizzying to contemplate. Fewer than 50 years separated a group of girls baking sugar cookies by hand in an Oklahoma kitchen from a massive industrial bakery, producing cookies by the countless thousands to feed a nation. The same basic product, a simple sweet, now flowed from enormous machines rather than home ovens, in quantities the original girls could not have pictured in their wildest imaginings. The cookie had travelled from the domestic to the industrial in a single human lifetime, This was, by any honest description, big business. There were substantial contracts binding the bakers to the organization. There were factories running at full capacity. There was serious money changing hands as millions of boxes moved through the system each year. The wholesome image of the enterprise concealed a genuinely large and sophisticated commercial operation underneath, the kind of operation that involves executives, logistics, and the hard-nosed economics of industrial food production. The cookie was cute. The business behind it was not playing around. Yet here lies the masterstroke that made the entire model work, and it is worth admiring properly. All of that industrial machinery, all those contracts and factories and flows of money remained completely invisible to the person buying a box. The customer never saw the giant bakery. They never met an executive or reviewed a contract or thought about production capacity. They saw a girl with a box of cookies and a bright smile, and that is all they ever needed to see. The heavy commercial reality stayed politely off stage, letting the charm do all the work. This separation was not an accident. It was the deep secret of the whole enterprise's success. Customers do not form emotional bonds with factories. They do not feel warmth toward contracts or loyalty toward industrial efficiency. But they feel enormous warmth toward a child selling cookies for her troupe, and that warmth is worth more than any amount of manufacturing sophistication. By keeping the girl in front and the machine behind, the operation captured the best of both worlds. The emotional pull of the personal and the raw power of the industrial. So the giants baked in the shadows while the girls charmed in the light, and the arrangement worked so well it would define the enterprise for good. Out of this era of industrial scale, the cookies themselves were about to transcend mere product and become genuine cultural icons, names spoken with reverence and devotion across the land. Somewhere along the way, the cookies stopped being snacks and became icons. The Thin Mint, cool and crisp and best served frozen, ascended to the top of the empire and never left. Around it gathered a supporting cast of legends: the caramel and coconut cookie, the peanut butter classics, each one earning fierce and often irrational loyalty. People developed strong opinions, ranked their favorites, and defended them like sports teams. A cookie that spent decades as a simple fundraiser had somehow become a cultural object, the kind of thing people hoard, ration, and mourn when the season ends. Very few products earn devotion. Fewer still earn it while being sold by someone who still has homework. The rise of the Thin Mint to the summit of the whole enterprise was total and permanent. It became and remains the undisputed champion, the best-selling cookie in the entire lineup, the one that outsells all challengers year after year. There is something about its particular combination. The dark and crisp chocolate wrapped around that cool, bright wave of mint that lodges itself in people in a way ordinary cookies never manage. And then there is the strange and beloved ritual of freezing them, of pulling a cold, snapping cookie straight from the freezer, a practice fans swear by with an almost religious conviction. But the Thin Mint did not rule alone. Around it assembled a court of legends, each commanding its own devoted following. There was the cookie layered with caramel and coconut, rich and chewy and complex, adored by those who wanted something more indulgent. There were the peanut butter classics, the sandwich, and the chocolate-covered varieties, beloved by a whole faction of fans who considered peanut butter the only true path. Each of these cookies had its champions, its defenders, its people who would argue passionately that theirs was the finest of them all, and argue they did. This is perhaps the most telling sign of the cookie's transformation from snack to icon. People developed genuine, heated opinions about which cookie was superior. They ranked them. They debated them. They defended their favorites with the same tribal loyalty that people bring to their sports teams or their hometowns. This is not how anyone behaves about an ordinary cookie. Nobody forms a passionate identity around a generic supermarket snack. But these cookies had become something more, something worth taking sides over, and the passion was real. The behavior of the fans revealed just how deep the devotion ran. People did not simply buy these cookies. They hoarded them, stockpiling boxes against the long cookieless months to come. They rationed them, doling out a precious frozen thin mint like a treasure to be savoured rather than a snack to be devoured. And when the season ended and the supply ran dry, they genuinely mourned, counting down the days until the cookies would return. This is not consumer behaviour. This is fandom. The kind of intense attachment usually reserved for beloved bands or cherished traditions. Consider how remarkable this truly is. Devotion of this depth is extraordinarily rare. Most products, no matter how good, inspire nothing stronger than mild preference. To earn genuine, fierce, irrational loyalty is the holy grail of any business, something companies pour fortunes into chasing and almost never achieve. And yet the cookie earned it, seemingly without trying, through nothing more than being consistently delicious, reliably seasonal, and sold by the most charming sales force imaginable. The devotion arrived as if by magic, though it was really the product of decades of careful building. The strangest and most wonderful part of it all is that this cultural phenomenon, this object of national devotion, is still sold by children. The same product that inspires freezer hoarding and passionate ranking and seasonal mourning is handed to you by someone who still has homework waiting at home. That impossible combination of genuine icon and innocent child seller would carry the cookie into its modern era, where the two names for a single cookie were about to spark a delightful national confusion. Here is where things get delightfully confusing. Depending on where you live, the exact same cookie might have two completely different names. What one region calls a Samoa, another calls a Caramel Delight. What one calls a Tagalong, another calls a Peanut Butter Patty. The reason is buried in the business itself. Different councils use different licensed bakers, and each baker brands the cookies its own way. So Americans have spent decades arguing over cookies that are nearly identical, convinced their version is the real one. It is a small, silly, wonderful piece of chaos, and it reveals the hidden machinery underneath the smiling booth. Two separate companies, quietly baking the same beloved treats. To understand the confusion, you have to remember how the modern system actually works. Each local council chooses which of the two licensed bakers will supply its cookies, and the two bakers do not use the same names for their products. One baker calls its caramel and coconut cookie by one name. The other baker calls its own caramel and coconut cookie something else entirely. The cookies are close cousins, nearly the same treat, but they arrive wearing different labels depending on which company happened to bake them. The result is a country quietly divided by cookie vocabulary. A person who grew up in one region knows their beloved cookie by one name and assumes, quite naturally, that this is simply what the cookie is called. Then they move to another part of the country, or meet someone from elsewhere, and discover to their astonishment that their cherished cookie apparently has a completely different name in this strange new land. The cookie tastes the same. The name is foreign. Confusion and occasionally mild outrage follows. These debates are genuinely heated and genuinely ridiculous, which is exactly what makes them so charming. People will insist with total conviction that their name is the correct one and the other name is some bizarre regional aberration. They will defend their cookie vocabulary the way people defend the proper word for a fizzy drink or the right way to pronounce a common word. It is a small, harmless tribal war fought entirely over the labelling of nearly identical cookies, and it has been raging happily for decades. What almost none of the combatants realise, of course, is that they are both right, and the whole disagreement traces back to a quiet business arrangement they have never thought about. The names are different because the bakers are different, and the bakers are different because the organisation licenses two separate companies to produce its cookies. The argument on the surface is about names. The truth underneath is about corporate licensing structure, which is a far less appetising topic and therefore never comes up at the booth. There is one interesting exception to all this delicious confusion, and it happens to involve the crown jewel of the entire lineup. The Thin Mint is called the Thin Mint by both bakers. The champion cookie, the bestseller, the object of freezer hoarding devotion, carries the same name no matter which company produces it. It is as if everyone involved understood that the flagship was too important, too beloved, and too iconic to risk muddying with a naming dispute. The Thin Mint transcends the schism entirely, universally known and universally named. This whole naming tangle is a wonderful little window into the machinery that customers never see. Two companies, one beloved brand, a nation of happily confused fans arguing over labels. But this same two-baker system, the source of all that confusion, was itself the product of a long and deliberate decision, a decades-long effort to shrink the number of bakers down and down in the name of one crucial goal. Over the following decades, the organisation made a deliberate choice that shaped everything you taste today. Seeking consistency in flavour and packaging, it steadily reduced the number of licensed bakers, trimming the field again and again until only two remained. Today, all official Girl Scout cookies come from just two bakeries, ABC Bakers and Little Brownie Bakers. This is why the cookie is so reliable, so uniform, so exactly the way you remember from childhood. Fewer bakers meant tighter control, and tighter control meant that a box bought in one state tastes remarkably like a box bought across the country. The wild kitchen table variety of the early years has become a precisely engineered promise. Cast your mind back to where this all began, and the trajectory becomes almost poetic. In the earliest days, every batch was different because every girl and every kitchen was different. Then came the post-war boom, when nearly 30 separate bakers were producing cookies, each one bringing its own slight variations to the product. That was wonderful for volume, but a genuine problem for consistency. With so many hands in the oven, the cookie you bought could vary depending on which baker had made it, and variation is the quiet enemy of a trusted national brand. The organisation understood this, and over the decades it made a patient, deliberate decision to solve it. Rather than allowing a sprawling field of bakers to each interpret the cookie their own way, it began reducing their number, consolidating production into fewer and fewer hands. Each round of trimming brought the cookie closer to true uniformity, closer to the promise that a box was a box no matter where or when you bought it. This was not a sudden move, but a long campaign, carried out steadily across many years in pursuit of a single clear goal. That goal was consistency, and consistency matters far more to a brand than most people appreciate. When a customer reaches for a beloved product, they are not just buying flavour, they are buying reliability. The comforting certainty that this cookie will taste exactly like the cookie they remember and love. Every disappointing variation chips away at that trust. Every perfect match reinforces it. By steadily narrowing the field of bakers, the organization was steadily strengthening the most valuable thing a brand can possess, the confidence of the customer that they will get precisely what they expect. Eventually, the trimming reached its natural endpoint, and the field settled at just 2 bakers, ABC Bakers and Little Brownie Bakers. These 2 companies now produce every official cookie sold in the country, and this small number is exactly why the modern cookie is so dependable. With only 2 bakers working to shared standards, the cookie can be controlled, monitored, and kept remarkably uniform across the entire nation. The chaos of 30 different bakeries had been distilled into the discipline of 2. The result is the cookie you know today, the one that tastes reassuringly identical to the one you remember from years ago. That consistency is not an accident or a happy coincidence. It is the direct product of a deliberate, decades-long strategy to sacrifice variety in favor of reliability. The kitchen table cookie, gloriously unpredictable, had evolved into something precisely engineered, a promise kept the same way millions of times over. 2 bakers remained, and they had become the invisible foundation of the entire modern enterprise. But those 2 bakers were not small family operations working out of quaint storefronts. They were owned by some of the largest and most powerful food companies on the planet, a corporate reality hiding just behind the innocent cardboard box. Peel back the wholesome image, and you find something surprisingly corporate. Those 2 remaining bakers are owned by serious food industry powers. ABC Bakers sits under Interbake Foods, and Little Brownie Bakers has been owned by the enormous Italian confectionery company Ferrero, the very people behind some of the most famous chocolate on earth. So the innocent little cookie you buy from a child is produced within one of the most sophisticated food manufacturing networks in the world. It is a strange and fascinating pairing, multinational baking giants on one end and a determined 9-year-old with a clipboard on the other. Somehow, impossibly, both sides of that arrangement work in perfect harmony. The gap between the image and the reality is almost comic when you lay it out plainly. On the surface, the cookie is the very picture of small-scale wholesomeness, a homemade-feeling treat sold by local children for their neighborhood troops. Underneath, it flows out of industrial baking operations owned by companies with global reach, enormous resources, and the full sophistication of the modern food industry. The cookie wears the costume of a simple bake sale while running on the engine of multinational manufacturing. Consider the ownership behind Little Brownie Bakers in particular. It belongs to Ferrero, an Italian confectionery giant whose name sits behind some of the most beloved and recognizable chocolate products in the entire world. This is not a modest, regional bakery. This is a company operating at the highest levels of global candy and chocolate production, a true titan of sweetness. And that titan is, among its many endeavors, producing cookies to be sold by children at folding tables outside grocery stores. The scale of the parent company and the intimacy of the sale could hardly be further apart. ABC Bakers, the other half of the arrangement, sits under Interbake Foods, itself part of a large corporate food enterprise. Here again is a serious industrial operation, built for high-volume professional food manufacturing, lending its considerable capabilities to the production of the cookie. Between these 2 corporate-owned bakers, the entire national supply is manufactured with all the efficiency, consistency, and sophistication that major food companies bring to bear. The homemade cookie has some very well-resourced parents. This creates one of the most fascinating pairings in all of American commerce. At one end of the arrangement stands a multinational food corporation with global operations and industrial might. At the other end stands a single child, perhaps 9 years old, armed with a clipboard, a stack of boxes, and an unshakable determination to hit her sales goal. These two ends could not seem more different, and yet they are joined together in a single enterprise, each depending entirely on the other. The corporation cannot sell the cookies, the child cannot make them. Together they are unstoppable, and the truly remarkable thing is how flawlessly the arrangement functions. The corporate machinery and the childhood charm do not clash or undermine each other. They complement each other perfectly, each supplying exactly what the other lacks. The giants provide the scale, the consistency, and the manufacturing power. The girls provide the warmth, the trust, and the irresistible personal touch that no corporation could ever manufacture on its own. It is a partnership of opposites that somehow produces perfect harmony. So the innocent cookie has a very corporate heart, beating quietly behind the cardboard. But knowing who bakes the cookie only raises the next natural question, the one that customers whisper to each other every single season. The question of where all that cookie money actually ends up going. Naturally, this raises the question everyone eventually asks. Where does all that cookie money actually go? The answer is more grounded than the conspiracy theories suggest. The councils pay the bakers a set amount for each box, somewhere around $1.30, and once that cost is covered, the money raised stays local, funding the troops and councils that sold it. Those funds pay for camps, trips, projects, and experiences for the girls themselves. It is not a scheme to enrich a distant headquarters. It is closer to a nationwide network of tiny businesses, each one ploughing its profits back into its own community, one frozen sleeve of thin mints at a time. The question comes up every season, usually in a slightly suspicious tone, because a business this large naturally invites suspicion about where the fortune ends up. When customers watch millions of boxes moving and hear figures approaching $1 billion, they cannot help but wonder who is quietly getting rich off all those cookies. It is a fair question. Big money always prompts big curiosity, and there is a lot of money moving through this cheerful little enterprise. The reality, though, is refreshingly down to earth. The financial arrangement begins with the councils paying their baker a set amount for each box produced, somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.30 per box. This is the cost of actually making the cookie, the payment to the industrial bakers who supply the product. It is the first thing that gets covered when a box sells, the baseline expense of the whole operation. The baker gets paid, and paid fairly, for doing the baking. But here is the crucial part, the part that surprises the suspicious. Once that baker's cost is covered, the remaining money does not vanish into some distant corporate vault. It stays local. The proceeds flow back to the very councils and troops that sold the cookies, remaining in the community where the selling happened. The money a troop raises belongs in a real sense to that troop and its local council. It does not get shipped off to enrich a faraway headquarters. It stays close to home, in the hands of the people who earned it. And what does that local money actually accomplish? It funds the experiences that give the whole enterprise its purpose in the first place. It pays for camping trips and travel, for community projects and activities, for all the adventures and opportunities that widen the lives of the girls who did the selling. The cookie money becomes summer camp. It becomes a service project. It becomes an experience a girl will remember for the rest of her life. The circle closes neatly. The effort of selling transformed directly into the reward of doing. This structure makes the whole enterprise something quite different from a typical corporation. It functions less like one giant company hoarding profits at the top, and more like a vast network of thousands of tiny local businesses, each one independent, each one reinvesting its earnings right back into its own patch of the world. The scale is national, even approaching $1 billion, but the benefit is intensely local, scattered across countless communities in the form of camps attended and trips taken and projects completed. So the money is not a mystery and not a scheme. It is a machine for turning cookies into opportunities for girls, running one box at a time across the entire country. And that reveals the deepest truth of all, the truth that the cookie was never really about the cookie, but about what the selling of it taught the girls who sold it. Strip away the sugar, and you find the real reason the program has lasted more than a century. Selling cookies quietly teaches girls a full curriculum that no school offers so directly. How to set a goal, handle money, talk to strangers, take rejection, and close a sale. A child running a cookie booth is learning budgeting, marketing, and the brutal art of the follow-up. Many of the most confident negotiators you've ever met sharpened their teeth on a folding table outside a supermarket. The cookie was always a Trojan horse. On the outside, it was a treat. On the inside, it smuggled in an entire business education, disguised as an afternoon of fun. Think about what a girl actually does when she takes on a cookie sale, and the hidden syllabus reveals itself. First, she sets a goal, a target number of boxes she intends to sell, which teaches her to aim at something concrete and measure her progress toward it. This alone is a skill many adults never fully master, the simple discipline of choosing a goal and pursuing it. But for the girl, it is just how the cookie season works. She names her number and goes to chase it. Then she must handle money, making change, keeping track of what she has sold and what she has collected, managing the small but real finances of her operation. This is practical arithmetic with genuine stakes, the kind of money sense that no worksheet can teach nearly as well as a coin purse full of a customer's cash. She learns what it feels like to be responsible for money, to account for it, to get the numbers right because getting them wrong has consequences. That is a lesson that sticks far better than any lecture. Perhaps most valuable of all, she learns to talk to strangers and to survive their rejection. She approaches people she does not know, makes her case, and endures the ones who say no. And plenty of them say no, often kindly, often with a warm smile that still ends in a purchase of exactly nothing. Learning to absorb that, to hear the no and keep going undeterred to the next person, builds a resilience that serves a person for the rest of their life. The booth is a training ground in graceful persistence, and the lessons are delivered by real people in real time. The art of the follow-up may be the most quietly brutal skill of all. A great many sales do not happen on the first ask. They happen on the second, the circling back to the customer who said maybe later, the gentle persistence that turns a hesitation into a purchase, the girl who learns to follow up, to return without being pushy, to convert a maybe into a yes, has learned something that professional salespeople spend entire careers trying to perfect. She's learned that the first no is rarely the final answer. It is genuinely true that some of the most confident, capable negotiators you will ever encounter first developed those instincts at a cookie booth. Long before they closed business deals or commanded meetings, they stood at a folding table outside a store, learning to read people, make a pitch, and ask for the sale. The skills built there ran deep and lasted long, quietly shaping capable adults out of determined children. The booth was a classroom disguised as a bake sale, and that is the profound secret hiding inside the whole enterprise. The cookie was always a Trojan horse, wheeling an entire practical education right into the heart of childhood, while everyone thought it was just a treat. The girls thought they were selling cookies, They were actually learning to run the world, which may explain why, even in an age of screens and apps, this century-old ritual refuses to fade and instead simply learn to sell online too. By now the cookie had done something almost no product ever manages. It created genuine cult behavior in otherwise sensible adults. Grown people plan for the season, stockpile boxes, and hide sleeves of Thin Mints in the freezer for the long cookieless months ahead. Entire friendships hinge on who has a connection to a scout. The scarcity is the point, and the fans know it, which is why they behave less like customers and more like devotees preparing for a drought. It is completely absurd when you say it out loud. A frozen mint cookie should not inspire this kind of loyalty. And yet, year after year, it absolutely does. Watch the behavior of a devoted fan as cookie season approaches, and you would think a natural disaster was on the way. They plan ahead. They mark the calendar. They arrange their finances and their freezer space in anticipation. This is not how a person prepares to buy a snack. This is how a person prepares to survive a shortage, laying in supplies against a coming scarcity. The mindset is one of stockpiling for hard times, except the hard times in question are simply the many months of the year when the cookies are not available. The freezer is the sacred heart of this whole phenomenon. Fans do not buy their Thin Mints to eat right away. They buy them to freeze, tucking sleeves of the cookies deep into the freezer where they can be rationed out slowly across the long, cookieless stretch ahead. A frozen Thin Mint, pulled cold and snapping from the freezer, is regarded by the faithful as the truest and finest form of the cookie, better even than fresh. So the freezer becomes a treasure vault, a carefully guarded reserve of happiness held against the drought to come. And then there are the social dynamics, which are frankly ridiculous and completely real. When cookies are hard to come by, knowing a scout, or knowing someone who knows a scout, becomes a genuine social asset. A connection to a seller is a connection to the supply, and connections to the supply are worth cultivating. Friendships gain a new dimension. Favors are traded. People who can secure boxes find themselves suddenly popular in a way that has nothing to do with their personality and everything to do with their access to cookies. It is a small, funny economy of favors built entirely around cardboard boxes of treats. The engine driving all of this madness is scarcity, and the fascinating part is that the fans understand this completely and behave this way anyway. They know the cookies are made deliberately available only for a short window. They know that this limited availability is exactly what makes the craving so intense, and rather than resenting the manufactured scarcity, they lean into it, embracing the whole ritual of anticipation, stockpiling and rationing with something close to joy. The scarcity does not frustrate them, it thrills them. It turns an ordinary cookie into an event worth preparing for. Said plainly, none of this makes any rational sense, and that is precisely what makes it so remarkable. A mint-flavoured chocolate cookie, however delicious, should not inspire grown adults to hoard, ration, plot, and mourn. Products simply do not usually earn this kind of devotion. But this one did, through the strange alchemy of consistency, seasonality, and decades of beloved tradition. The fans became cultists of the frozen mint, and they wear the title happily. For most of its long life, though, this cookie moved the old-fashioned way, hand to hand and door to door. The cult was about to discover that its beloved treat could now be summoned through a screen, as the ancient hustle stepped into the digital age. For most of its life, the cookie moved the old-fashioned way, hand to hand, porch to porch. Then, in 2014, the operation stepped fully into the modern age with an online platform. letting customers order cookies through the internet and letting girls manage sales with apps and digital tools. The pitch that once required knocking on a stranger's door could now travel by link, text, and screen. It was the same fundamental hustle their great-grandmothers practiced in wax paper bags, only now armed with technology. The tools changed completely. The core skill, convincing another human being to buy a cookie they did not plan to buy, remained exactly, eternally the same. For nearly a century, the method had barely changed at its core. A girl found a customer, made her pitch, and completed the sale in person, whether on a porch, at a shopping centre, or outside a grocery store. The transaction was physical and personal, conducted face-to-face, coin passed to hand. This was how the great-grandmothers had done it in their wax paper bags, and it was, in its essence, how the girls of the modern era still did it. The fundamental act of selling had remained remarkably constant across the generations. Then, in 2014, the enterprise made its great leap into the digital world. An online platform arrived, allowing customers to order cookies through the internet rather than only in person, and giving the girls modern digital tools to manage their sales. Suddenly, the whole operation had a presence on screens, a way to reach customers who were not standing physically in front of a booth. The cookie had entered the age of the internet, joining the vast migration of commerce onto phones and computers. The change in tools was total. A pitch that once required physically knocking on a stranger's door could now travel instantly across the internet, carried by a link, a text message, or a post on a screen. A girl could reach relatives across the country, friends of the family in distant cities, anyone connected to her digitally, all without leaving her home. The geographic limits that had always bound the cookie, the simple fact that a girl could only walk so far and knock on so many doors, suddenly dissolved. The customer base expanded from the neighborhood to potentially the entire connected world. And yet, and this is the beautiful part, the essential thing never changed at all. Beneath the new technology, the girl was still doing exactly what girls had done for 100 years. She was still identifying customers, still making her pitch, still persuading another human being to buy a cookie they had not planned to buy that day. The link and the text and the screen were simply new delivery methods for the same ancient art of the sale. The medium was modern, the skill was timeless. This continuity is genuinely striking when you sit with it. The great-grandmothers with their wax paper bags and the modern girls with their apps are doing fundamentally the same work, separated by a century of technology, but united by an identical purpose. Both must find the customer. Both must make the case. Both must close the sale. The tools evolved almost beyond recognition, from paper labels to digital platforms, but the human core of the enterprise, the persuasion, the hustle, the determination, remained perfectly intact across all those years. So the cookie proved it could thrive in any era, adapting its methods while preserving its soul. But the digital leap was not the only piece of modern brilliance keeping the empire strong. There was another strategy, older and quieter, so effective that any company on earth would envy it, and it was hiding in plain sight all along. Perhaps the single smartest thing about the entire empire is something it almost never gets credit for. The cookies are only available for a short window each year. In an age when you can buy anything at any hour, this deliberate scarcity is marketing sorcery. You cannot get them in July no matter how badly you want them, and that impossibility is precisely what makes the craving unbearable. The limited season turns an ordinary cookie into an event, a countdown, a small annual holiday of sugar. Any company could copy the recipe. Almost none would have the discipline to sell it for only a few weeks. The scarcity, more than the flavor, is the true secret ingredient. We live in an age of endless availability, and this makes the cookie strategy all the more astonishing. Nearly everything can be bought at any moment, delivered to your door within a day, summoned with a tap at 3 in the morning if the mood strikes. Scarcity has all but vanished from modern life. Almost nothing is truly hard to get anymore, and into this world of infinite availability, the cookie does something almost radical. It makes itself deliberately, stubbornly, gloriously unavailable for most of the year. You cannot buy these cookies whenever you please. For the great majority of the year, they simply cannot be had, no matter how intense your craving, no matter how much money you would happily hand over. If you want a box in the middle of summer, you are out of luck. This season has passed, and the cookies are gone until it comes around again. This impossibility, this hard wall of unavailability, is not a flaw or an oversight. It is the deliberate engine of the entire craving. Because scarcity does something powerful to human desire. When we know we can have a thing at any time, our wanting of it stays calm and casual. But when we know a thing is available only briefly and will soon be gone for a long stretch, the wanting sharpens into something urgent and almost painful. The knowledge that the window is closing turns mild interest into genuine hunger. The cookie understands this perfectly. By vanishing for most of the year, it ensures that when it finally returns, the craving is at a fever pitch. The limited season also transforms the cookie from a mere product into an event. It becomes something anticipated, counted down to and celebrated when it finally arrives, a small annual holiday marked by sugar. Its return is a moment, a signal that a certain time of year has come again. People look forward to it the way they look forward to a favourite season or a cherished tradition. No ordinary, always available snack can generate that kind of anticipation, because you cannot anticipate what is simply always there. What makes this so brilliant is the discipline it requires, a discipline almost no other company could summon. Any business could copy the recipe. Any business could bake a similar cookie and sell it. But almost no business could bear to sell such a beloved, profitable product for only a few weeks and then deliberately stop, leaving all that potential money on the table for most of the year. The temptation to sell year-round would be overwhelming. Yet that very restraint, that willingness to stay scarce, is what keeps the magic alive. The discipline is the strategy. So the true secret ingredient was never the chocolate or the mint. It was the scarcity, the once-a-year genius that any company could envy and almost none could imitate. And this masterful strategy, combined with everything else, had built the little cookie into something whose sheer scale defies belief. The scale of it today is genuinely staggering. This little idea from a high school cafeteria now moves somewhere around 200 million boxes in a single season, generating close to $800 million a year, powered by more than 1 million girls. It is one of the largest girl-led enterprises on the planet, and it runs on nothing more exotic than sugar, cardboard, and relentless charm. No shareholders demanding growth, no glossy television empire, just an annual tide of small salespeople and the customers who cannot say no. From one troop in Oklahoma to a nearly billion-dollar operation, it may be the most successful business in America that never once forgot who it was really for. Let the numbers sink in slowly, because they are difficult to fully grasp. Around 200 million boxes of cookies move in a single season. Not over years, but in one short annual window, 200 million boxes make their way from bakers to booths to homes across the country. That is a torrent of cookies, an almost unimaginable quantity of cardboard and sugar flowing through the nation in a matter of weeks. And it happens year after year, as reliably as the seasons themselves. The money follows naturally from the volume, and it is just as staggering. The enterprise generates something close to $800 million in a year, a figure that pushes right up against a full billion. This is not the revenue of a quaint charitable bake sale. This is the revenue of a major enterprise, a genuine economic force moving sums that many established corporations would envy. The humble cookie has become, by the raw measure of dollars, a true heavyweight of American commerce. And behind all those boxes and all those dollars stands the real engine, more than 1 million girls. This is the sales force that makes the entire thing possible. Over 1 million young people carrying the cookies to the customers, making the pitches, closing the sales, and driving the whole enormous machine forward. It is one of the largest enterprises led by girls anywhere on the planet, a distinction it has earned through nothing more than a century of small hands doing the selling. The scale of the sales force is as remarkable as the scale of the sales. What makes all of this even more astonishing is how simple the underlying formula remains. This empire runs on nothing exotic or complicated. It runs on sugar, on cardboard boxes, and on the relentless, irresistible charm of children selling a product they believe in. There is no secret high technology at its core, no mysterious ingredient beyond the timeless appeal of a good cookie sold by a determined kid. The simplicity is almost comical given the scale. 200 million boxes built on charm and sugar, and it operates unlike almost any other enterprise of its size. There are no shareholders standing over it demanding endless growth, no vast advertising empire buying its way into the public mind. It grows instead through the annual tide of its small salespeople and the simple human truth that most people find it nearly impossible to refuse a child selling cookies for a good cause. It is enormous, yet it never adopted the cold machinery of the typical giant corporation. It stayed, at its heart, a matter of girls and neighbors and cookies. From a single troop in an Oklahoma cafeteria to a nearly billion-dollar operation, the journey defies belief. And through all of it, across more than 100 years of astonishing growth, the enterprise never once forgot who it was really for. Which brings us at last to the sweetest truth of all, the one that reveals what this whole improbable empire was truly building the entire time. In the end, the story of the Girl Scout cookie was never truly about the cookie. It was about a century of girls learning that they could set a goal, do the work, face the world, and win. Every frozen Thin Mint and every argued over Samoa carries inside it more than 100 years of quiet ambition, of mothers and daughters counting coins on kitchen tables, of children discovering they were capable of far more than anyone expected. The empire was accidental, the lessons were not. And so tonight, as the story of that unstoppable little cookie winds toward its close, it is worth remembering that the sweetest thing it ever produced was never sold in a box at all. Trace the whole long journey back through everything we have followed tonight, and a single truth rises above all the rest. The cookie was always the vehicle, never the destination. Beneath the sugar and the branding and the staggering sales figures, the real story was about girls, generation after generation of them, discovering something powerful about themselves. They learned that they could choose a goal and pursue it. They learned that they could do difficult work and see it through. They learned that they could face a world full of strangers and refusals and still, somehow, win. Every cookie you've ever bought carried that hidden history inside it. Every frozen Thin Mint pulled from a freezer every caramel and coconut cookie argued over by name, held within it more than 100 years of quiet ambition. It held the memory of mothers and daughters counting coins on kitchen tables in an age when women were barely allowed to hold money at all. It held the determination of girls knocking on doors, standing at booths, and facing rejection with a smile. The cookie was small, but the human story pressed inside it was vast. There is a lovely irony at the heart of this whole tale. The empire itself, the nearly billion-dollar national enterprise, was almost entirely accidental. No one in that Oklahoma cafeteria set out to build a business colossus. No one along the way plotted world domination through cardboard boxes of treats. The girls simply needed money for their troops, and cookies were what they had, and one clever idea led to another across 100 years until, almost by surprise, an empire stood where a bake sale had been. The scale was never the point. It simply happened. But while the empire was accidental, the lessons never were. Those were the true product all along, deliberately grown in every girl who ever set a goal, handled money, made a pitch, or learned to hear a no and keep going. The camps and trips the cookie money funded were wonderful, but they were not the deepest reward. The deepest reward was what the selling itself built inside the girls, the confidence, the resilience, the quiet knowledge that they were capable of far more than anyone had expected of them. That was the real harvest, gathered one box at a time. So the sweetest thing the cookie ever produced was never actually a cookie. It was never the chocolate or the mint or the caramel. It was the girls themselves, a century of them, walking away from their cookie seasons a little braver, a little sharper, and a little more certain of their own power. That is what an unassuming sugar cookie, born in a high school cafeteria, quietly built across more than 100 years. Not just an empire of boxes, but generations of capable, confident young people who learned, through the simple act of selling, that the world was theirs to take on. And so, as the story of that remarkable little cookie settles into stillness tonight, that is the thought worth drifting off on. That sometimes the smallest, simplest things carry the largest lessons, and that a treat sold by a child was all along quietly teaching that child that she could do anything. So, there it is. The whole improbable journey, from a handful of teenage girls baking sugar cookies in an Oklahoma cafeteria to a nearly billion-dollar empire that quietly conquered the American calendar. Along the way, we watched them survive a Great Depression, outlast a world war by selling calendars when the sugar ran dry, brand a cookie with a trefoil, and train a century of children in the gentle, relentless art of the sale. It is a story that is a little funny, a little astonishing, and a lot more remarkable than the cheerful booth outside your grocery store would ever let on. Tonight, as you settle deeper into your pillow, spare a warm thought for all of them. For Juliette Gordon-Low standing on her head to sell an idea nobody was ready for. For the mistletoe troupe, who solved a problem with an oven and accidentally lit a fuse. For the mothers counting coins on kitchen tables in an age that barely let them hold money at all. And for the more than 1 million girls who still every single year knock on doors and staff the booths and learn, one box at a time, that they are capable of far more than the world expects. Because that was always the real cookie. Not the chocolate, not the mint, not the caramel argued over by name. The real thing being made quietly for over 100 years was courage. Small, sweet, stubborn courage, sold 25 cents at a time. So rest easy now. The lights are low, the fan is humming, and somewhere out there a 9-year-old is already planning next season's goal. You have nothing left to do tonight but drift off, warm and grateful, and let the soft, steady story of that unstoppable little cookie carry you gently down into sleep. Good night,